Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority Board of Directors meeting. It is Thursday, September 21st, and we do have a quorum. Welcome, everyone. First is 1.1 to approve the agenda. Does anybody have any changes or any addendums to make? If not, a motion to approve would be lovely.
So moved, Rich.
Moved by Rich, seconded by Simi, and all in favor, say aye, raise your hands. Thank you so much. That passed unanimously. And now we're on to general announcements. Are there any general announcements? I actually have a few. The board wishes to acknowledge and thank Dr. Elizabeth Gerber for her service to our board of directors. Her passion for public transportation and her concern for the environment was duly felt and appreciated. So I wanted to take that time. I also wanted to share with the board some sad news. An LAC member, Dr. Elizabeth Aldridge, passed away in late August last month. She had served on the LAC since 2014 as a member and as an executive committee member, most of those years on the executive committee. She was a light in the community and a tireless advocate and will be greatly missed. She and her family, we want to share our condolences with them. Next, the monitoring task force is not on our agenda because they did not meet in September. They will reconvene in October. And I want to share that the governance procurement task force will be up and running on October 1st. We had our third person volunteer. So we are now all set and ready to go for that. So you do not have to listen to me asking and begging anymore. And finally, the governance committee has begun the process of reviewing CEO compensation, and a recommendation will be brought to the board later this year. And that's everything that I have. Did that spark anything for anyone else? No? All right, thank you so much. Oh, go ahead. I sure did. I apologize. Next on our agenda, I am so sorry, is public comment. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to let everyone know tomorrow is the A20 Green Fair going on down on Main Street. And there's also some supplemental stuff that's going to be happening here at Library Lane from 2 to 6, and TheRide will be participating. There will be a bus, and excited to see Lillian out and maybe some other staff. So we'll see more.
Oh, that's exciting. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, so it's 2 to 6 at Library Lane and 5 to 8 on Main Street.
Very good.
So it's sort of the Library Lane activities are more transit oriented because Spark also has Mobility Row Tech Trek around Liberty Square. So it's sort of a bridge event between that and the Green Fair on Main.
Oh, exciting. Thank you for bringing that up. And now, due to my faux pas, we're going to backwards go into public comment 1.2. Deb, is there anyone online?
Yes. Mr. Mogensen is, and you are unmuted, sir.
Welcome.
Yes, Jim Mogensen. So one thing that happened at the last meeting was that you passed the environmental sustainability as a executive limitation. And I understand it. So one of the concerns I had relating to that is not about environmental sustainability, but what happens if the other executive limitations are in conflict with each other. For example, what if the financial considerations and activities and the asset protection are complicated as it relates to environmental sustainability? And how does one reconcile that? And so that when I came into that meeting, I was thinking that the environmental sustainability was going to be an ends, where it made sense that the CEO would be able to reconcile that and explain it. And that the board would be able to see whether or not that explanation made sense. But now that there are executive limitations, how does one reconcile it? So I hope this is seen not as being adverse to environmental sustainability, because that would be an incorrect assumption about myself, but I do see that you're passing the budget, and there'll probably have to be an amendment. It looked like on the future topics are zero emission bus CEO recommendations. And as I've mentioned in other meetings, I remember I'm one of the people who've been around a very long time. And I remember when that first happened, when the staff came up with the 0.7 mil, and they had very carefully figured out exactly how much it was going to cost. And they had used low emission buses. And then people the community came in and said, we need hybrid buses. And when that happened, it created financial challenges. So given the sense of the dramatic need for environmental sustainability, I just wanted to bring that forth as a concern moving forward for the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Deb, is there anyone else? Okay, thank you. That will close public comment. And now we will move on to 1.4, officer elections. There are 3 positions that are open: the secretary, the treasurer, and the chairman of the board. According to our bylaws, we are to have a voice vote. And what we'll do is we'll start from the secretary position and work our way around. And so do we have any nominations from the floor for the position of secretary? Or you can nominate yourself.
I'd like to nominate Jesse Miller for secretary, if he's still willing.
Just support. Very good. Are there any other people interested in the secretarial position? Seeing none, we will still take a vote because that makes sense. And so all in favor for Jesse to remain and continue on as secretary for the next year, please raise your hand. And that passed unanimously. Congratulations, Jesse. Next is the position of treasurer, and currently that is being held by Mike Alamang. Do we have anyone who would like to make a motion or a nomination? Sorry for the words.
I would like to nominate Mike Alamang to continue to serve as treasurer.
Mike, do you accept? Oh, I heard support. That's why I asked. Jesse did, or someone over here said support. I did hear it. With that, okay, Mike says that he will accept the nomination, and so now we will take it to vote. All those in favor of Mike remaining treasurer for the next year, please raise your hands. And that passed unanimously. Congratulations, Mike, and welcome again for another year. And finally, we have the board chair position that is open over the next year. Do we have any nominations from the floor?
I'll nominate Kathleen Mozak, please, for chair, if she's so willing.
I'll second.
I will accept that nomination. Do we have any other folks who are interested in? Seeing none, we will go ahead and take a vote. All those in favor of Kathleen remaining board chair for the next year, please raise your hands. And that passed unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Oh, and yes, congratulations to everyone for staying on another year. We appreciate you. Next on our agenda is the consent agenda. You will find the board meeting minutes there and the committee meeting summaries. Do we have anyone who would like to make a motion to accept those into record?
So moved, Rich.
Rich moves. Do I have a second? Second by Kyra. Any dialogue on the motion? No, seeing none, we'll take a vote. All those in favor, raise your hand. And that again passed unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Moving on, we will go on to ownership linkage, and that is Mike Chang, Rich. Why did I call you Mike? Look at me.
We're the same age.
Okay, I'm out of touch in a while. Yeah, so the Open Dialogue Task Force updates. It's really exciting to see how the staff and the board work together on these initiatives. We got some really good news from Mayor Taylor. He has requested that we and the DDA switch off every other month to provide a 10-minute update near the beginning of each city council meeting, so once a month. And I think they usually said like the second city council meeting of each month. So for instance, like if we do October, Then DDA we do November, then we do December, and it just flips back and forth. I have to apologize that I've been a little bit behind on other tasks, and I know my next task was to actually schedule time with Mayor Brown of Ipsy, but I'll be taking care of that in 2 weeks. I have some like work stuff that I'm just like finishing out here, and I'll be completed with that on the 29th, and then after that I can concentrate on this.
Excellent.
Great.
Thank you. And then who will be giving the report? Will that fall to the CEO or to CEO staff, or we just don't know yet? We have to work that out.
We'll have to work that out.
Okay. Sounds good.
You're gonna win.
Sorry, Mr. CEO. All right, we're going to move past monitoring as there's nothing for this evening and move on to policy. The first is about the budget approval process, and coming in line, Mr. Carpenter is going to speak to us.
Thank you, Madam Chair and board members. Before Ms. Reed makes her important presentation, I'm just here to provide a very quick reminder. As we discussed at length a few meetings back, we have a somewhat hybrid board process between policy governance and more sort of traditional approaches. That does include particularly the budget approval process. So there is a two-step process this evening, and it is, this evening is important. We do have a deadline. We need to have our budget approved before the end of the fiscal year, which is this month, so we're in the waning hours here. Two-step process. The first is you will be presented with a series of monitoring reports. This is your collective expectations as a board were given to us about how budget and fares, two separate things, are to be done and handled. You'll receive monitoring reports to those. If those are acceptable, you'll vote on them as you would any other monitoring report, acceptable or not, interpretations, evidence, all that sort of thing. Assuming you find them acceptable, that would signal that we've met your sort of collective predefined expectations for the budget. So that's a very important first step. The second step is required by law. As a board, you vote individually, or as individuals, but as a group, excuse me, on the budget. So that will be the second or third part of that, two monitoring reports and then that vote. We do, per our bylaws, need 60% of serving board members. There are 9 appointed board members. There are 8 present, so we will need 6 of 9 to, at a minimum, to pass the budget. So those are the steps you'll be presented with this evening.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you so much. With that, then we will move right into 5.1.1, financial planning and budgeting. That is monitoring report 2.4. Dina?
Thank you. You have financial planning and budgeting policy 2.4 in your packet. This monitoring report was distributed to the board, and the board all voted and on the monitoring report, and it was reviewed at the last finance committee meeting. At that meeting, we reviewed some of the details of the report, but mostly I mentioned that policy for the voting, the only policy that received any comments other than approval or reasonable interpretations and evidence was policy 2.4.1. And although that policy was interpreted as reasonable, there was a comment about it not potentially being based on complying with policy 2.5, which is really a comment for the board to consider, I think, in reference to whether this policy needs to be reviewed. So I just want to remind the board that a few months ago, the committee was going to review this policy, and they decided to postpone it, or you as a board decided to postpone that until after the budget process. So that might be a consideration to review during that process once the budget gets approved for this fiscal year. With that, I have a lot more comments that will go to policy 2.4 in my presentation for budget approval. But with that, I would turn it back over to the board, noting that the recommendation from the Finance Committee was to accept the report with option A.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Reed. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts on the report itself? Seeing none, do I have, the Finance Committee has recommended, I believe, option A is what was said. Do I have a motion from the floor?
Yeah, I motion to approve.
That would be from Chris and seconded by Mike. All those in favor of accepting the monitoring report as A, please raise your hands. And that passed unanimously. Very good. Insofar as the comment about 2.4 and following policy 2.5, I believe that would be something that we would put with the other work that's going to be done since that policy is under review. Is that correct? Okay, very good. All right, we're going to move on then to the fair policy, which is 2.5.1.2, and we'll dovetail back to Ms. Dina Reed.
Thank you. Policy 2.5.12 fair policy is in your packet. The staff submitted the report as compliant and was reviewed by board members. Holistically, it was also reviewed at the last Finance Committee at the same time as 2.4 was. There was one comment in policy 2.5.12 in requesting, it looks like, clarification on some of the fares. I will note that no fares were changed this year, and no fares will be changed in fiscal year '24 or are being requested to be changed. So the Finance Committee reviewed the policy and is recommending to the board approval with option A as well, fully compliant.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Actually, I do, because I'm the one who wrote that. My biggest concern is that on the table, we say that there are same-day fares for paratransit and they're $4. But then you have an asterisk down at the bottom that says something about, I believe it's, what is it? It's the D2A2 fares are controlled by the RTA and not under the authority. But nowhere else in the report, like for regular fares, is RTA reported. And I'm concerned that the public may be confused or find that number confusing, because we do not, the only thing we do have for paratransit that is same day, it's not called same day, it's called will call. So if you have a doctor's appointment or whatever, when you make your ride, you schedule your trip there, but then when your appointment is done, then you contact the dispatcher and they will send out another ride within whatever time frame that they have. So that is what will call is, but we don't have a same day. Somebody from paratransit can't just call up and say, hi, I need a ride today, just out of the blue. And so that's what I'm finding really confusing about that being on the report. I'm just trying to advocate, trying to keep things simple, I guess. It's on page, if you're looking at it, it's on page 42 of the packet. And it is under same day reservation, which is the second one down under cash fares of the A-Ride. So that was my concern. I just wanted to make sure that we didn't put any weird stuff out there to be misconstrued, and I'll shut up now.
Thank you. And can I comment?
Yes, of course.
Based on that comment that we received, we did relook at the fares report that's in the budget book, and we made some updates for more clarification.
Okay.
We checked it against what is available on our website, which was more accurate to what you described here. So we've updated that in the budget book as well to address your comments.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I just didn't see anything in the board packet about that, so I appreciate you letting, or did I miss it? Was it in the board packet?
No, we actually updated it after we received the comments back.
see.
So it was between the time we sent it out last and the new budget book. So maybe I should have pointed that out, and I will maybe look to do so in the future.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And do we have any other comments or questions? Yes, Jesse.
Although I think it's actually just bringing to light something else that you had mentioned, was that the Gold Ride fares were not included in the table, except as a reference to if someone qualifies for Gold Ride, then they don't have to pay for Flex Ride or fixed route. But I think the on-demand like door-to-door service is not listed in the table.
Yep.
Thank you for catching that.
We did update that in the budget book as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So with that, the Finance Committee has recommended receiving the report as A. Do I have a motion on the floor? Jesse supports a motion to have the report received as A. Do I have a second? Supported by Kyra. All those in favor, raise your hands. And that also passed unanimously. Thank you, everyone. And now we go to the meat and bones of the evening. We are going to hear from Ms. Dina Reed with regards to the operating and capital budget, and we will make a decision when she is done.
Hopefully I don't mess this up. Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. It sounds quiet on my end. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present the recommended budget. As you know, we've had many presentations on the committee level and at the board level, so I've updated some information and changed some of the information just to give you a different context and more context. In your packet, in your board packet is the budget book itself, which is the basis of the budget that's being presented, as well as the resolution. And after we're done with the presentation, we would requestfully respect approval of the budget so we can continue operations into the next fiscal year. That being said, tonight I'm going to go through a brief budget introduction, talk about how our process a little bit and some of our key accomplishments, and then go through some important notes about the recommended budget that I'd like to share. And then, of course, answer any questions that you have in terms of the conclusion. So to start out, I just want to talk a little bit about our policies and processes for any of you who may not have been at previous presentations. Our budget process is policy-driven, strategic, collaborative, and transparent. We spend a lot of time and effort making sure that we do outreach not only to the public, staff involvement, board involvement, all through the process. So at the bottom of the screen here, you can see what I've been showing you all along, which is our budget calendar. Didn't think we need to go through that again since we're at the end of the process, but I just wanted to share that our perspective on this process is that it's intended to be a reflection of the policies that the board set, a reflection of the strategic nature of how we look at the budgeting process, and that we include comments and collaboration from staff, the public, and the board throughout the process, all the way up to and including this evening where we have an opportunity for general public comment and board comments and questions. And then lastly, just point out that you can see we're kind of at the finish line, and that's what's in the lower right hand. So hopefully this will be the finish line this evening, but that's the intent of this presentation, to get you to make sure that you're comfortable with what we've presented. So our budget advances, board ends, and I know we say this pretty much every time, but it's very important to point out because nothing we do happens without referring to the ends and making sure we're furthering the ends policies the board has set. Just like in the last presentation, some of these little images, if you will kind of notate what some of these ends are and how they affect the public and the organization. As we go through the process, you'll see notes of these, or as we go through the presentation, you'll see notes of these indicating where we think these apply in terms of the strategic portion of the budget process. Our budget is aligned with our business plan, and our business plan is directly aligned with board's ends. As you can see on the left of this slide, the board's ends are kind of weaving in through our primary objectives for this fiscal year, which are to attract new riders, increase ridership, excellence in service delivery, and agency-wide continuous improvement. Everything in the budget goes to something, one of these objectives or priorities, or the board's ends directly. Another important point to make that we've made before, but is important to iterate, is that we do follow policies and procedures. We are a highly regulated environment. We follow federal law, we follow state law, we follow board policies, and we just want everyone to know that we're cognitive of that as we build our budget. Some of our key accomplishments in the budget this year are being able to continue operations in fiscal year 2024 at full service levels. No planned reductions in service of any kind at this point. We are accelerating the millage services. We talked a little bit about this last time, and I'll just kind of mention accelerating means we started the millage process about a year, over a year, about a year and a half ago now. And during that process, when we were thinking about the strategy and when those millage funds would come, we thought to ourselves, is there a way that we can actually start phasing in these services and start services as soon as the first millage hits, or as soon as the millage hits, which would be in the fall of next fiscal year? But we knew that we'd have to ramp up and incur some costs ahead of that to be ready to operate on the day. And so what we did at the time was we thought, can we use some of the pandemic relief funds to bridge that gap so that we can promise those services as soon as possible to our public if there's support? And that was the strategy, and is still the strategy now. So that's why I say that we're accelerating. Some of the millages services have already started this fiscal year. We have a new customer service agent team at the YTC right now, and that was really funded with the millage. So we're advancing funding for that, but we have a sustainable funding source with the millage. So that's the interpretation of accelerating millage services. We're also not changing fares because of the support of the public. And having that millage and sustainable resource, we do not have to increase fares or change fares to accommodate what's in our budget for fiscal year 24. Our budget is balanced. You'll hear a little bit more about that, but there will be no surplus this year, but it will be balanced revenues equaling expenses in the budget. And our capital projects are fully funded for fiscal year 24, not for the full 10-year program, and we'll talk about that later, but just want to note that they're fully funded in 2024. So moving on to talk a little bit more about the operating and capital recommended budget. Our budget is $61.4 million for operations and $26.4 million in capital investments, and that's just for fiscal year 24. It's important to note that as we've projected, we will be spending the rest of our pandemic relief funds in 2024. We're right on track with that. We are leveraging one-time funding opportunities. One of those opportunities is additional state revenue for state operating assistance. That is a result of emptying the CTF fund, which funds the operating assistance. That is only a one-time upside to us, and it has allowed us to actually relieve some of the use of pandemic relief funds next year that we originally projected, so to balance the budget. So that's good news. We're presenting the budget in context of a 7-year operating budget projection and a 10-year capital plan so that the board has comfortability of the sustainability of what we're proposing in our budget. So to talk just about the operating budget for a few minutes, as I mentioned, revenues equal expenses, and we have a lot of different categories that are kind of listed here. We're going to talk a little bit more about it, but what I want to just point out here is that the budget is balanced. I want to talk a little bit about what our operating funds are spent on. A majority of our budget is spent on people, operations, maintenance, customer service, and transportation. So the pictures you see here, the operations, maintenance, customer service, purchase transportation, that's a majority of our budget. We also have to buy supplies, fuel, tires. Those are the biggest things in those categories as you're looking at the budget if you're looking at the straight P&L. We also have to maintain and operate our facilities, so our budget provides for that. And we provide for safety services and supplies. This is pretty much a majority of the expenses that you see in our budget. We do have initiatives that are laid into the budget for fiscal year 2024, and those go back to board policies and board ends, but a majority of our budget is spent this way. The budget does provide for initiatives. As I mentioned before, we have the millage services is our biggest initiative by far. We went through kind of a detailed review of that last time, of the phasing in of the staffing that needs to happen in order to meet the millage. The costs are, as you can see in the expense side, are significant, but that's what it costs to put the extra service out there, and so we're funding that fully. We're funding the daily mission of operating transit services. That's what a majority of our budget still is. We do have some extra funding for staff development, customer satisfaction initiatives, sustainability initiatives, and technology improvements. So they're much smaller in terms of percent of budget, but they are meaningful in terms of what we can do throughout the fiscal year. And as I mentioned, the impact, the millage is by and large the biggest increased expense in the budget for the additional services. And the reason is we will be hiring. So the good news is with all this expense, we will be able to hire about 35 FTEs to directly support the millage services. It's a benefit and a challenge. Hiring that many people in one fiscal year is going to be a challenge for us, but it is something we're excited to do and looking forward to do. You'll also see an increase in the budget in purchase transportation, and that is the services like TheRide that will be increasing. So the increase in that line item is related also to the millage. So it's not just direct staff, it's also on-demand services. So the big question is, where does all the money come from? And pretty much the majority of our budget comes from a combination of property taxes, passenger fares, and state and federal funding. This pie chart kind of shows you the distribution of that. I will note just a couple of things about the revenues. As I mentioned before, on the state operating assistance, that's 34%. That's a bigger percentage than usual, and that's because of that one-time influx that we're getting for fiscal year 2024. That will probably go back down to something more like 29 or 30% after 2024. And I color-coded this graph so you can kind of see how big a portion some of these things are. If you combine the state and the federal funding on the left there, that's all in the green, and then local property taxes, community support, passenger fares are also community support in some ways, so I coded them both as blue. The yellow there, the pandemic relief funds, has typically been a bigger percentage of our revenue over the past few years. It's been somewhere around 15 to 17 million over the past few years, but now we're exhausting that, and it's only going to be 6.8. And in fiscal year 25, that little yellow pie piece goes away completely. So that will be recovered with an increase in property tax revenues, so that the darker blue will get a little bit bigger in 2025 and beyond. So the changes between the 23 and 24 budget are really, it's kind of interesting because we're not projecting a surplus for the first time in the last 3 years. So revenues, while they're coming down and expenses are going up, still results in a balanced budget. We have pandemic relief funds that we're exhausting, as I've mentioned. We have the one-time upside from the state operating assistance that's helping that out a little bit. We have a little bit of increase in other revenues, and then we have accelerating millage service expansions. We do have some inflationary pressures on the maintenance side. We talked about that a little bit last time, and just to remind you, it's just the cost of parts are going up for what we're going to pay. We were a little bit sheltered from that for a couple of years because of warranty parts and having contracts in place. But as we have to go out for new contracts and some of those buses are coming out of warranty, those costs are going up. So those are just things that we're noting here. We do have reduced and stabilized cost of fuel. That was a really volatile item coming into 23, but for 24, it looks to be more stable. So we actually had a slight reduction in that category. And all in, we expect to spend about $61 million or just over on a balanced budget. For the capital budget, we're planning to spend $26.4 million. We have several categories that we talk about when we think about our capital expenses and how we spend the capital funding. We categorize things by state of good repair, value added, expansion, and research and development, so that we can accurately make sure that we're taking care of the assets that we have first. So these are really in order of how we prioritize what we spend. So we're spending about $22 million to maintain and keep our facilities and buses in a state of good repair in fiscal 2024. We've got some value added projects and expansions of service and other items too, but by and large, majority of our funding is going to be spent taking care of the assets that we have for next fiscal year on the capital side. So what do we spend it on? I just mentioned some buses, but we also have facilities, the YTC, the BTC, and the Operations Center. A majority of the capital budget next year is maintaining the fleet and funding the Operations Center roof and HVAC replacement that still needs to be replaced. For value added and expansion projects, there's some exciting things here, and these things are not fully funded in FY24 in terms of the whole project, but we're starting the planning and design for the YTC expansion. You can see here there's some site plan concept pictures. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like because we're going through the planning and design phase, but we're starting that in fiscal 2024. Transit signal priority is also high on our list, and bus stop improvements. They're all funded and initial planning for the Washtenaw super stop and mid-block crossing. So these are all elements of value added, but they don't total as much as you might think in the fiscal 2024 budget because that's just 1 year. Throughout the capital plan, if you look at the 10-year projection, you'll see that there's going to be a significant amount of capital funding for these projects over the next few years. So where do we get the money for capital? We get it generally from the FTA and MDOT. That's our formula funding, discretionary funding, congressionally directed spending, which used to be called an earmark. So you're going to see that term now instead of earmark. I just want to kind of acclimate you to the terms that we're using. A majority of our funding, as you can see here, close to about 80% is federal funding, and then about 20% is state funding. So with that funding, that's what's funding the capital plan today. But as you know, we've been building a little bit of a capital reserve based from the surpluses that we've had over the past couple of years. So I want to note here that we need to really protect that capital reserve for transportation projects in our capital plan. As I mentioned before, fiscal year 2024 is funded, but as we start building these projects and working through the projects in the capital plan, this is how right now the capital expenditures are programmed from that reserve. Based on the projects we have, if we had the way it's funded now with no additional funding, which is not what we're hoping for, we're hoping to get more funding, but if there was no additional funding, this money is already completely programmed out to 2029 and exhausted by that time for the projects that are in our capital plan. We're going to be working hard to get additional funding, grant funding, discretionary grant funding, and other types of funding if they're available to fund these projects and future projects as well. But we just wanted to point out how important it is that we take care of this money to leverage it for future projects. One of the best things we can do with this money is demonstrate the commitment behind our projects to the FTA so that they understand that we're willing to put forth some percentage of the funding for a project and get the rest of the funding from the FTA. We can't do that without this type of funding that's available. So what we'd like to see is that we start to leverage, instead of spending maybe $16 million directly in fiscal year 2027 to fully fund a project, that we could leverage a portion of that money to get more money from the federal government. So that's something that we're very cognizant of and working towards, and will continue to work hard towards over the course of as we work our way through our capital plan. Right now, we're estimating approximately $34 or $35 million to be in the capital reserve. And once the pandemic relief funds are completely exhausted, there's no way to fund any more money to the reserve. So revenues will equal expenses. There might be, you can see here, there might be a little bit of additional reserve after the new millage comes, depending on how revenues and expenses shake out. But after, pretty much after the pandemic relief funds are spent or exhausted, this is all we would have in a reserve. We've never been able to fund a reserve like that before. So we're going to protect it, take care of it, and spend it wisely. So thinking ahead, we have a long-range plan. We have projects in TheRide 2045. I just wanted to point out that the projects that are in the capital plan today that go out to this time frame beyond 2028, they are from the capital plan. So everything you see in there is from the board-approved capital plan. I do want to note, as I was going through this, the layout in the capital plan doesn't fully incorporate all the costs for the remainder of all of the projects. It stops after 10 years. So one thing I'm going to be working on this year is reformatting that so that we can get the full cost of all the projects in the capital plan beyond the 10-year period, even into the capital plan, just so that it's there and the board can see the full effect of every single project in our plan. So in conclusion, one thing we always want to point out is that our budget always has opportunities and risks. We are continuing to serve our communities. We're accelerating our millage services. We have an approved millage through 2028. These are all important opportunities for us as an agency. And we have a long-range plan to guide the decisions that we're making and to work towards funding. In terms of risks, though, there's a lot of inflation. We've talked about that, and we're seeing some of that come through the budget. State and federal funding is always unknown. I don't know if any of you have noticed recently, but it looks like we're going to be potentially headed towards a continuing resolution on the federal side. That is not unusual, but if they don't come up with a bill or approve a bill by the end of the fiscal year, which it doesn't look like they will, we'll be looking towards a continuing resolution. Right now, I see no risk in the budget related to that directly, but that would impact us if they can't reach agreements over time. But those are things that we continue to watch and participate with as we go through the process. Ridership recovery is another opportunity and a risk. It's something we're working hard to try to do, as we've talked about before with some of our initiatives, but it is a risk in the budget because we assume that we're going to continue to grow. And so that's something that we're going to watch as well. Staffing is another potential risk because, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have to hire a lot of people. And while that's a really cool thing to be able to do in the community and provide these services, it can be a challenge to make sure that we can fill all the positions that we need to fill. So we're going to watch that. And that kind of goes to the phasing of the millage initiatives as well. But all in all, we have a very stable financial projection. We have revenues exceeding expenses throughout the millage period into 2029. So that's good news for us. We're in a much better financial position than we were several years ago, and we've done a lot of work to get us here. We plan to do a lot of work to sustain that. We also want to point out that we have a positive fund balance, we have established reserves, and we have no debt. That being said, just kind of conclude with kind of reminding you of what our key accomplishments are of the budget process, the things that we're looking forward to providing for the community with the support of the board. Also want to share that our budget documents will be available on our website under performance. So if you want, if the public or the board wants to see, right now it's the draft document, but it will be the final budget document once we move forward from this meeting. And that concludes my presentation for the budget, and we would respectfully request that you consider approving the budget so we can move forward with all of the promises that we've made tonight to the public. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dina. We'll open up the floor to the board for questions, comments. Mike, I'm wondering, as treasurer and committee chair of the finance committee, what are your thoughts? I'm going to put you right on the spot there.
Well, I'm very happy to have that opportunity, Kathleen. Thank you. I continue to be very impressed by the financial strength of this organization and the financial management of this organization. I've been involved in a lot of for-profit and nonprofit financial activities, and of course, the heart of that is frequently budgeting. I am really continue to be impressed, and in fact, even more so every year, as under Kathleen, under your leadership recently, and of course under Dina's financial leadership, and in terms of the solidness of what's behind these numbers. We look at those quite a bit in the finance committee, of course, the procedures that go into preparing them and making them believable. And then, of course, I think, Kathleen, I mean, Dina, you really do an outstanding job of presenting the budget. So on a high level, kind of to the board and to the public, that goes a lot easier to understand than a whole bunch of numbers. And every year it gets even better. And you should be congratulated, along with everybody that really goes into the budgeting process. And in terms of keeping triple ATA on a very, very solid financial footing. I hope that in terms of what you're putting on the website, that you will include the slides from your presentation today, because I think that's not overwhelming like, for example, the whole budget book would be. And it gets a really nice overview. I feel very, very confident in this organization as financial strength.
Thank you, Mike. Are there any other comments or questions from the board at this time? Thank you, Dina, to you and your staff
Thank
for
you.
all your hard work.
I appreciate those comments, and thank you to everyone that participated in the process, including our staff who worked tirelessly to put this together with us. So thank you.
Excellent. So we will now move on to the decision-making portion of the budget process. Do I have a motion to accept the budget, the 2024 financial budget as presented this evening in draft form? What, did I do something wrong?
I'm sorry, just procedural legal thing. There's a
Oh.
resolution in
Oh,
your
I have to read it?
packet. No, you don't have to read it. You can if you like to, out loud. For legal reasons, we'd ask that you vote on the resolution.
Oh, I see. Thank you very much for that help. I appreciate it. So in your board packet on page 56 is a resolution of the Board of Directors of the Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority to accept the budget as presented. I will not read the entire resolution out loud for everyone. It is a matter of timekeeping. Thank you again. And so looking at the resolution, do I have a motion to pass the resolution as written?
Okay.
Yes, Mike?
I actually have one very minor suggestion regarding the wording to that. And that's in the resolved section right at the end. The 21 through 24 TIP, I think there may be some people who don't know what this acronym stands for. I would suggest that we put in the words, which I believe were Transportation Improvement Plan.
Matt, did you want to respond?
Just as a clarification, Mike, are you asking us to just spell out the acronym?
That is right.
For the purposes of clarification, would anyone like an explanation of what the TIP is? All right. I don't think that's a problem.
I don't know. We'll keep the word TIP in parentheses after the spelling out the acronym. It doesn't change the motion, I don't think.
I think that's a valid concern for the public. We may know, but the public may not know. So that's a good point. Any other questions, comments, or concerns about the resolution as written? Yes, Ms. Malika Ross Williams.
Just a technical matter. If the resolution is not going to be read, is it available? I'm assuming it's available in the packet for the public to review?
Yes.
Okay, just asking. All right.
And with that, do I have a motion to approve the approve the resolution as written with the amendment that the TIP will have the explanation of what TIP stands for after it?
I motion to approve the resolution.
Okay, thank you. That motion.
Second,
by-
Rich.
And seconded by, first by Chris Allen and seconded by Rich Chang. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And is there discussion on the motion?
I'm sorry, I saw staff talking and I think I know what they were talking about. It is already spelled out in it's in one of the whereases, the Transportation Improvement Program is spelled out. And I, for one, would appreciate being able to sign the piece of paper in front of me tonight rather than having to make another trip into the, into the Don-Gabay Operations Center.
Mike, recognizing that since it was your concern that was brought forward, is that all right that it's, okay. All right, so then we will not going to amend the resolution, which now means we need to go back to a vote. So do I have a motion to approve the resolution as written?
Motion to approve the resolution.
And that would be Mr. Chris Allen and seconded by?
Second by Rich.
Thank you so much, everyone. And we will now raise our hands and take a formal vote. And that passed unanimously. Thank you, everyone, for all your hard work. And thank you again, Dina, and your staff for this. Wonderful. So it's 20 after 7. Does anyone need to take a little bit of a break? Or are we ready to move on to the rest of the agenda? Okay, seeing no request for a break, we'll go ahead and move on to 7.1 Title VI updates, and that's Mr. Forrest Yang.
Hello, everybody. On the page 57 of your packet, there's an issue brief about the Title VI program update. As we have been talking about since May, transit agencies are required to have a Title VI program and review, update every 3 years. And this year, we are required to submit our Title VI program update by November 30. We engaged the consultants to do the program review and update. At that part of the project, there are 2 policies included in this board packet. So one is public input policy, and the other one is equity analysis policy. Those are policies guiding our service and fare changes. I just want to make it clear, those policies are part of a Title VI program, but they're standalone policies approved by the board. So in order to get the millage plan process going, we have to do the equity analysis for the proposed service change. We need those 2 policies approved by the board so we can use those 2 policies for equity analysis. Those service proposals are going to go out in October for public feedback. So the equity analysis is part of the materials for public review. So those 2 policies being reviewed, as you can tell, the last public input policy was approved in 2011, which is more than 10 years ago. The equity analysis policy was approved back in 2014, almost 10 years. They still meet the minimum requirement, but they're outdated. For example, the input policy, especially the way we communicate with our customers, the community, has changed quite a bit. So the policy is basically being updated to reflect those new ways of communication, engagement, especially incorporate, let's say virtual meetings, social media type communication. So the equity analysis policy, we basically reviewed it from current policy really focus on individual route analysis. But the updated policy is more broader and take a look at the system-wide impact other than just one particular route. And also introduce some threshold based on federal guidance. So those are basically some key change to those policies. As you remember, back in July, the consultants, George Harris, did a presentation basically outlining all the changes. And then since then, we published those draft policies for public review. And we did 2 in-person meetings. We did 2 virtual meetings. We talked to more than 300 people, but there hasn't been any concern or suggest change to those 2 updated policies. Recommended policy change. So that's why we include in the board packet for your approval today. And there are 2 resolutions, one for each policy. Before we I ask you a few questions, but I want to say the plan was to get you approved the whole Title VI program today, but unfortunately, we got some mapping technology issue. We couldn't finish the whole report. So the consultants continue working on those details. But those two policies, like I said, they're standalone policy. They will become part of the final Title VI program for your approval next month. But right now, because the timeline for the millage plan, public engagement, we want to get those two policies approved. Sorry for additional work for the board, and you have to do at the two meetings. But the two policies, updated policy attached to this issue brief, and like I said, there are two resolutions for board to consider. And I see you have some questions.
Thank you, Forrest. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, Ms. Monica Ross Williams.
Just real quick on the translations, that's on page 60. I see that's available in Spanish, Korean, Chinese, Arabic. Is it available in Braille, just in case people are blind and they can't?
Sorry, I
You didn't hear, okay.
no,
Is it
no,
also-
I
yeah.
try to understand what you're asking for.
Yeah, it says on translations on page 2, on the various ways that the public is notified of changes. The very last one is translations, and it says the AATA notifies the public that translations of public engagement and information materials is available upon request in Spanish, Korean, Chinese, Arabic. My question specifically was, is it also available in Braille, just in case people are, they're having sight issues?
That's basically like an ADA issue.
Okay.
We are obligated to provide some service there. Like if people have special need, we would to assist.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments? So if I'm understanding you correctly, Forrest, we're going to have two resolutions, one on attachment 1, which is a public input policy for service and fair change. Oh, and then the other one is the equity analysis attachment 2. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. So board, I direct you to page 62, the resolution for the adoption of the revised public input policy for service and fair changes. It's pretty straightforward. It was emailed to all of you last week, and I hope that you have had a chance to read it. If there are there any questions on the resolution itself? Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve and adopt the resolution as written? Motion by Jesse Miller, seconded by Mr. Richard Chang. Any discussion on the motion? Then we will take a vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye. And thank you, that passed unanimously. We will now move on to the equity analysis policy for service and fair changes. That resolution is on page 68. Would someone like to make a motion on the adoption of the revised equity analysis policy for service and fair changes as found on page 68? Motion was given by Mr. Rich Chang, seconded by Mr. Jesse Miller. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, we'll go ahead and take a vote. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And that also passed unanimously. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Forrest, for you and your team. And we look forward to October, where we will find the rest of the report, correct? Thank you so much. All right, then, we are going to move on to 7.2, the quarterly 3 service report, and that is Mr. George Brooks.
Good evening, everybody. If you look in your packet, starting at page 69 and then moving on to page 70, I did highlight some data there that in an effort to make it more clear. I had given the wrong data earlier during our service report meeting, and I had the wrong number in the middle column while I highlighted it red, just so that you saw the change of data. There's a couple nice things or positive things to report on, and there's also a few challenges to report on. One of the good things I'd like to report on is our software is now working properly. As you can see on the subsequent page reporting on the on-time performance, our on-time performance is now available, and we are now charting that. It's at 81%. I did some comparisons to other organizations very similar to ours. Our ridership is positively rebounding between the numbers of 77 and 79%. Our on-time performance is, as I stated, 81%. We are at the top end of other authorities with very similar ridership. In fact, we are number one right now compared to 4 other authorities. Our on-time performance is ranking somewhere in the middle, but in comparing CADA, SARTA, Champaign-Urbana, and the Rapid, our ridership has rebounded number one compared to the other authorities. So that's very good news. Turning to page, I know it's right in front of me, but it's, I'll go to the page with MV A-Ride Paratransit. Again, I wanted to make sure that I gave the correct data, and you'll see there highlighted number 14. I originally had reported 0. After having our initial meeting, I knew that the data was off, and I did check it, and it was actually 14. So that's why I highlighted that, just to bring that to your attention, that there was a change. As you can see, our trips are edging up, which in turn is reducing the cost of boarding. We've had substantial ridership increase with our MV ridership, not so much with the Gold Ride. We are still working and challenging ourselves to improve the amount of denials. There's a multitude of items that go into that equation that we're working on. On a positive note, our van pool ridership is going up. The number of riders, along with the mileage that we're experiencing, is edging up. Some of the challenges on the east end of service, as previously discussed, is our capacity constraints and high demand on the east end. Turn to 2 pages more in your packet under Golden Ride, and you'll see in FY23 Q3, our denials are at 29. That's one of our challenges in the next quarter, that we've highlighted this issue and that we're trying to greatly reduce the amount of denials. There are multiple things that are giving us a challenge in reducing that, such as software for scheduling. We have a new contract going out that we think will improve the response to our customers, including better competition resulting from the new contract that's being developed, and should start getting more competition and more people bidding on that new contract starting in May of 2024. If you turn your page to the next page to D2A2, our ridership is definitely going higher. It's edging higher, as you can see. I think we're up around 5,000 rides. And right now, that's all I have to report. Does anybody have any questions?
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Brooks with regards to the report as presented? I just have one question with regards to the ADA service denials and ADA boardings. I understand that you're going to be looking at how to better improve that. Is that something that is happening? Is that a software issue? Is that something happening on a booking issue? It just seems like a large number.
I think it's a compilation of various items. You know, I think we've become better educated as we've understood the how the system should work. Part of the challenge is having a good software system in place for ride sharing. It's also, we have a great demand in that area, or a greater demand on the east side, which is it's making us struggle. But in an effort to respond to that, we have allocated more people and money towards that area. We have twice the amount of operators working in that area. Our service time is compared to the west side from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. We've increased our service time in the east side to 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. to try to improve our response. I think as we've learned, go ahead, Matt.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify. Kathleen, was your question about the paratransit A-Ride
Yes, it was-
services or FlexRide?
No, it was most definitely, I was going to allow him to finish though, because it was good information. But my question was with regards to the ADA service denials and ADA boardings. The number was 14 there. And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts, but I really appreciated the information that you were sharing. And if you would like to go and finish that for everyone, just to give us a better picture, I would appreciate it.
Okay, so your specific question originally was regarding MV. I mistook
Yes, I
that.
apologize. This was regards to the ADA service denials that were 14 for the Q3.
What happened in this quarter, we did a deep dive into this because this had previously not been a problem. And what we found is we did have a software glitch that was making us think when we scheduled the ride that it would take longer per ride. We since fixed that. What happened was, because of the software glitch, we were thinking we couldn't schedule as much as we could, so we didn't. Thus, we were denying rides. That has since been fixed, and I anticipate that that should be fine in the next quarter. In fact, we met again today just to discuss that situation.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Were there any other questions for Mr. Brooks? Yes, Ms. Monica Ross Williams.
And it may not be an area that the FlexRide covers. So I got a lot of some people that go out to, I believe it is the truck manufacturer over off of State Street, going down towards Saline, and basically needing to have FlexRide services and saying that that's out of area. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that.
I want to be careful that I don't misspeak, but I
Okay.
do believe that's out of our service area in Saline. But I can look into that for you and get back to you.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I've got it from like 3 different people.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
I'll definitely look into that
All
and
right.
let you know.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Go ahead, Jesse.
Not a question, but I just wanted to re-acknowledge when I brought that I wanted to thank you for pulling the denial rates on the FlexRide, so that's something that we can start addressing. And I had mentioned in the service committee, I was surprised that while the number of rides in the east service area is a little less than twice as much than the number of rides in the west service area, the number of denials is almost 10 times as much. And I'm glad that we're now tracking this, that's been identified as an issue that hopefully we can get rectified as soon as possible.
Thank you, Jesse. Are there any other comments or questions? Thank you, George, for all your help. We appreciate
My
you and
pleasure.
your staff. We're going to move on now to 7.3, the construction grant authorization discussion policy 2.10. Originally, it says verbal, but Mr. Carpenter sent an email out today with a information type addendum, and that has been provided at all of our desks, but it's also been emailed to you. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Carpenter with this new information.
Thank you, Madam Chair and board members. So some years ago, the board developed policy, executive limitations pertaining to construction. That policy requires me to get the board's approval before embarking on construction projects, I think for obvious fiduciary reasons. It also requires me to get your approval before submitting grant applications that could commit us to construction projects, which I think is also quite reasonable. I did send an issue brief earlier today. It has been amended into the board packet that is available online, so any members of the public listening this evening can refer to page 76 in the updated packet. This is an emergent issue. It is a little complicated because it's kind of not our project. It's an RTA project that we're partnering with them on, so it bears a little explanation. But long story short, I would like to ask for your authorization this evening by a simple motion and vote to continue into this partnership. There's a lot of benefits to TheRide in advancing some of our capital projects, frankly, with outside funding. We received some of the details of this proposal only yesterday, so that's part of the reason you only got it today, and I do apologize for that. But we're not being asked to put any money on the table, which is a nice thing, and potentially could see $30 million or so, or $22 million worth of investment in the community should the grant be successful. So I think there's a lot of upside to our participation. There's not really any risks to saying yes. There is risk to saying no, and I'll elaborate on that. So that's it at a high level. But to back it up a little bit and give you some context, there are a lot of grant programs coming from the federal government for transportation and infrastructure these days. One of them is the Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhoods federal DOT grant program. It is a competitive program. The state of Michigan, through the governor's office, reached out to the Regional Transit Authority to explore the possibility of this being used to advance bus rapid transit in the greater Southeast Michigan region. Through a lot of discussions back and forth, Forrest and I attended some meetings in Detroit. This sort of moved around. There's a lot of institutions and entities and political jurisdictions involved here. We have Oakland County, Wayne County, Macomb County, Washtenaw County, City of Detroit, the three transit operating bodies, the RTA itself, the state of Michigan, the DOT. There's a lot of people involved, sorry. And what eventually emerged was the project that's alluded to here, a overall, I think, $120-something million proposal for the entire four-county area of the RTA. Most of those funds would obviously be on bus rapid transit corridors in Metro Detroit, Woodward, Gratiot, Michigan. But then over here in Washtenaw County, always the RTA has identified Washtenaw Avenue as a BRT corridor as well. So we're getting brought along as part of this process. The scope had a lot of discussion over the months, even though it was emerging rather quickly. What finally sort of settled this week was a scope that really focused on, I'm happy to see, sort of nuts and bolts improvements in the corridor, not BRT per se, but the kinds of investments that lead towards BRT. And this is really, these are, I think, very tangible, real things. 16 enhanced bus stops, including at the two transit terminals at the Blake and the Ypsi Transit Center. These include large shelters, better lighting, next stop information signs, and then very importantly, queue jump lanes. And if you've never seen one of these, imagine the bus pulls up to an intersection and it's got its own light. And it can bypass, the light's smart enough to know when the bus is there, it can just jump ahead of the queue, hence queue jumper. It's a great way to give the bus an advantage over regular traffic without a really heavy investment like a bus lane. It's a good interim step in this direction. So these are all very worthwhile investments. And we were very excited, and my congratulations to Forrest and his group for working with the RTA to sort of to finalize that. What we heard yesterday that I think was very exciting was that the RTA has managed to get the state DOT to commit to all of the local funding. Now, these competitive federal grants, usually you got to bring some local money to the table, as Dina alluded to in her budget presentation. And that is the case here, although I think it's 80 to 80-20 or 90-10? 90-10. So 90% federal, 10% local. That's really good by grant standards from the DOT. But they've gotten MDOT to agree to pony up all of that local match. So there's no commitment from us, no pressure on our capital reserve, and the projects that would be provided should this win are very meaningful things across the busiest corridor we have, touching each one of our communities. So I think it's an excellent opportunity. I will be honest with you, it is a bit of a long shot. I want to manage everyone's expectations. It's a very competitive program. We will be competing against cities from states across the nation. So I don't want to get anybody's hopes up too hard about this. And there is, I think, so there's a lot of good in the proposal. It is a bit of a long shot. I want to manage everyone's expectations. I do see some political downside from not participating. This is a regional effort, and if we were for some reason decline to participate, it'd be kind of like throwing mud in your neighbor's eye. It's you get the stink eye back. It's I think wise for us politically to go along with it. And since there's very little risk from a financial perspective, that makes it relatively easy. So the construction policy lays out a number of criteria that you have asked us to provide to you before we embark on a grant application. That information is here in the detailed attachment to this. You can see some of the financials, more details about the scope. So that's basically it. I would love to get your authorization to participate. If you do by motion, it would basically be under the terms that are outlined here. If that were to somehow radically change, I would need to come back to you. But the deadline here is a matter. I believe they really want me to give them a letter of support tomorrow, if possible. So the grant application deadline, I believe, is next week. So they have been moving pretty quickly on this. So with that, more than happy to answer any questions that we can.
We'll open up the floor to the board. Any questions or concerns to Mr. Carpenter with regards to this proposal? Yes, Ms. Moss-Williams.
It's really more of a comment. I know that when I used to attend the Watts meetings, we were, when I was elected, we talked about the Washtenaw Rapid Bus Transit. That was a big discussion, right? Trying to look at ways to eventually, right, get that done to improve the corridor for ridership across municipalities. So to see that here today, that actually makes me excited, even though I have to temper my expectations, of course. So yes, it's a great opportunity. Free money is always good money, right? That's what I tell my kids all the time. If you can get it for free, that's good. Especially when it came to college. So with that, yeah, I'm really excited to see this go forward, and hopefully it would be a great opportunity for the AATA to move her along the rapid transit in Washtenaw.
Thank you. Mr. Jesse Miller.
I think the only question that I would feel that I would want to be answered specifically is this in line with the work that we've done so far on BRT?
Excellent question. I'm going to ask Forrest to weigh in.
Good question, Jesse. Basically, what we, because the timeline. So we didn't do a lot of work. We basically took the 2018 study, the BRT study, incorporated those bus stop locations because that was, I mean, through some public engagement, through some detailed analysis, that was the conclusion back a few years ago. So we basically just incorporated those bus stops, and plus the Blake Transit Center, for example, expansion. We need a lot of shelters along 4th Avenue. We did not include a lot for the YTC because YTC is a separate project, but there will be some real-time information there being proposed. Mostly, like I mentioned, focus on the queue jump lanes, the location identified as a congestion area by previous studies.
Yeah, as long as this isn't somehow going beyond the scope or, creating some sort of like obviously not unfunded mandate, but something that would, I just want to make sure that this is in alignment with our plans. It sounds like your answer to that is yes, and that's the only question I needed answered to support this.
Thank you. Any other? Mike Elamay?
Yes, my only question really has to do with decision-making in terms of specifics along Washtenaw. This is an RTA project, as you made clear, yet it will be in our service area. How is the decision-making going to happen, assuming that this does get approved, in terms of the specifics of what and where?
I'll ask Forrest to sort of describe how this proposal has come together. Because I think it's come together in a pretty collegial, collaborative way. But just historically, a bit of a challenge that everyone in the region has is a little bit of overlapping roles between the RTA and the existing transit agencies in terms of who's responsible for what and where exactly does one agency's role begin and the other one's end. That is always something in every project we find ourselves negotiating and renegotiating kind of as a particular project moves forward. Bus rapid transit on Washtenaw started off, as Mr. Ross Williams remembers, as very much our project. Then the RTA was created, and it became their project. Even though it didn't cross a county border, it was still seen as an intermunicipal thing. Then the RTA couldn't get their millage passed, so they kind of threw the project back over the fence to us, and we were doing studies on it. And so it kind of moves back and forth a little bit. That is something Forrest and I discussed as if this grant is successful, we need to focus on with them in terms of sort of nailing down exactly who's responsible for what. Generally, they are a pass-through organization. They have no operational staff other than like 2 or 3 people. They have no procurement department. They can't execute something. Just don't have the appendages for it. So they would tend to rely on folks like us and DDOT and SMART to implement these sorts of things. So I think that gives us a great deal of control over the details of where exactly does the queue jump go, how does it be configured. But we have a really good working relationship with the staff at the RTA from a technical level, so I'm not overly concerned about that. But Forrest, do you want to weigh in?
Sure. Even based on my the experience working on this grant application, they are very respective. Like just say it's up to us which bus stop, what location, and where the queue jump lanes, and they don't really get into the technical details. I think even back in 2018, the study, if I remember correctly, they paid, but they did not, kind of get involved in the decision, whatever. So that's the way it has been based on my personal experience. I mean, at least at the staff level, we've been working that way for a while. For this project, there wasn't really a clear definition of all those roles. But I think RTA is submitting this was in partnership with MDOT, and MDOT owns that right away, right? So hopefully, whatever scope put in that grant application is being supported by both RT and MDOT. And that set the tone for the ongoing effort on that corridor.
Are there any other questions or comments? Hearing none, we've been provided with a construction grant partnership authorization. The details are in your board packet. I suppose I'm saying this out loud because Mr. Carpenter made a point of that this vote is on what is written here, and anything that changes would have to come to us in the future in another way. So based on what is written here, what we've heard from Mr. Carpenter, do I have a motion to have staff move forward to do the grant application for the partnership that's been described? Ms. Monica Ross Williams and Mr. Mike Alame? Is there any discussion on the motion as presented? If not, we're going to go ahead and take a vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that also passed unanimously. Thank you, everyone, and congratulations to the staff for getting involved in this project. I don't think I really remember how you heard about it, but it seems like these things could slip through the cracks if you didn't have your ears to the ground, so thank you so much for that. And next on our agenda is the CEO report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of highlights I'd like to touch on. First of all, we are working feverishly to bring you the zero emissions bus propulsion recommendation next month. That's something that's been on tap for a while, and I'm happy to report it's evolving quickly now. So do look forward to that. Legal counsel contracts were awarded to Dykema. I want to thank board members who were involved in that discussion. Thank you for your input. I was a bit of a nail biter there. Actually, I was surprised by the outcome, but thank you all for your input and participation on that. Obviously, the UAW strike, we were, I threw that point in on the CEO report just before we sent it out the door because it had just happened. We're watching that one very closely. Our buses, our full-size buses, not likely to be affected, but a lot of our support vehicles, minivans, pickup trucks, those sorts of things are big three products. And so parts, technical support, those sorts of things could be impacted as the strike drags on. So hopefully it won't. But I know the fleet staff are stockpiling pieces and things like that. So that's under control. So, but we are watching it very closely. And one last thing, as a reminder for you, every year we do a leadership training course. I know many of you have partaken in the Leadership Challenge. It's a 2-day training effort. It's intended for staff, but we open it up to board members as well, free of charge. We understand 2 days is not an insignificant commitment. We make it worth your time. Mike Neese will be returning to teach another class. If you have done the Leadership Challenge, I encourage you to say nice things to your colleagues about it. If you did the 360 anonymous LPI survey once upon a time, and you'd like to do it again, even without taking the class, we can do that for you. As an alumni of the class, you can get an update of that. So feel free to avail yourselves of that. If you would like to do either the 2-day course or just do an LPI, just reach out to Monica Boot in HR and she'll be happy to get you the details. You should have received, I think, an email today or yesterday about that. So that's it, Madam Chair. Happy to answer any questions.
For those who don't know what an LPI is, could you, who have not attended the conference before, can you describe to them, if they don't necessarily have the time to be able to go to a 2-day seminar, but could actually do that part of it? Could you tell them what that stands for and what the outcome is, what the benefit is?
Sure. So the Leadership Challenge is a leadership training paradigm and book that's been around for about 30 years. It was developed some time ago. It focuses on behaviors. Sometimes, there's a variety of different leadership training manuals or tools out there. Leadership Challenge is the one I'm most familiar with, and we've been using it here at this agency for some time now. It involves an anonymous 360-degree assessment. You may have done things like this for your colleagues or for yourself. DISC assessments sometimes do similar things. This one focuses on asking your respondents, how often does, let's say it's my LPI, and I may inflict this on all of you, just so you know, because I haven't done one in a while. When I send mine out to you, it will go through the behaviors that they have learned that, sort of good leaders demonstrate. And they will ask you the frequency with which you see me displaying those behaviors. I think this is a very important, I think it's LPI stands for Leadership Practice Inventory, I think. And so they ask, basically, here are these behaviors that good leaders should generally exhibit. How frequently do you see Matt exhibiting these behaviors? I think that's an important distinction, because it's not asking you to judge me, or is he doing a good job or a bad job, because that involves some subjective opinions on the individual. It's simply asking, how frequently do you see him exhibit these behaviors? A whole lot, not very often. It asks you, obviously, the same question a couple different times to triangulate on it. So that's the 360 LPI. Generally, it's asked by your superiors, people at the same level as yourself, and people in a more subordinate position, and outsiders, peers, if you will. And so it's a good thing to do. I've been doing it for 15 years, and I have found it a very good way to get anonymous sort of gut check on my personal patterns of behavior. Sometimes you can lose track of them. And it's nice to have a very anonymous third-party opportunity for you to ask for feedback from folks who know you. So that's the LPI, and it can be done without attending the class.
Thank you for letting us know that that's available. I hope that we have board members that may want to take advantage of that. I have had the pleasure of attending twice. Outside of gaining a lot more perspective on myself and style and things like that, it was also a really good way for board to engage with staff. So I had the opportunity to meet with Troy, who is fleet management and all of that. I've been on one with Dina, and it's just a really good way to engage, become more human, to interact and have that sort of dialogue. So if you're on the fence about, does this really pertain to me? Do I really see a value in this for my own personal life? I would also ask you to think about that additional question of, would you like to have more engagement with staff, have more understanding, maybe be more visible to staff, because we're not, we don't walk into that building on a daily basis and see them. They may see us if they're watching us or come to a meeting. So I would consider, have you consider that question when you're considering doing this or not. So do we have any emergent items? Oh, did you? Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. We were not wrapped up, I apologize, with the CEO report. Are there any other questions? And then Jesse does have one.
I had a few things. One, the bus rodeo, is that something that's going to be open to, is that something that would have spectators, or is that really just a for operators kind of thing?
You can attend, but you have to wear chaps. No, actually, the bus rodeo, I'm gonna ask George to say a little bit about this, because it's a high tootin' good time.
Yeah, we're looking forward to getting this started again. It's going to be a day of fun with operators competing against each other for some prizes. We'll have food out there and a few tables for the various families that attend to participate. We don't know exactly what we're doing yet as far as the tables for the family, but a couple options are some balloon making for the children that attend. But by all means, you're definitely welcome to come out. It's actually something that I've participated in over the years at the authorities that I work for, and it's a lot of fun. I plan on being there, so.
George, is it open to the public or is it sort of invitation?
Usually it's by invitation, and it's primarily for internal competition between the operators, just to, for them to show their skills and have a day of fun and camaraderie internally.
Yeah, this precision driving skills in terms of being able to back a bus up, jump it off a cliff, okay, maybe not that. But certainly by all means, board members, and I would extend it to anyone you think you'd like to invite. I don't see you have a problem with this. There's nothing secret about it.
Right.
Well, and I have to tell you, having been a bus rider for many, many years, and when the rodeo was going on pre-pandemic, it is so fun to watch and hear drivers tell their stories. You know, you make friends with drivers when you get on, and you learn about them and the pride that they take, and they'll say, oh, I won last year, but I didn't win this year, or so-and-so did such a great job, or so-and-so knocked down 20 cones or whatever. And so it's just I think it's a wonderful way to develop camaraderie between the drivers and things like that, but also it does spill over to the public, because they do have that little bit of engagement afterwards where they're feeling good about what happened. So I'm really glad that we're bringing it back.
Yeah, I really would appreciate. I'd appreciate knowing I mean, you gave the date, but I'd like to know the when.
Yeah, I'll shoot you the logistics and exactly what's going on in the next couple of days. I'll shoot it to everybody.
Okay, thank you. And the other thing. I just wanted to, welcome the new class of MCOs and congratulate Ernest Burkeen on the new being the new bus operations supervisor. I actually had the pleasure of meeting one of the other supervisors at EarthFest today on the Diag. I meant to say that during announcements, but Anthony, I did not catch how to pronounce his last name, and I don't want to butcher it. But it was really great to see, people both from the inside the garage and in the front office, interacting with the University of Michigan community and doing that public engagement. So it was really great to meet him, and just thank you to staff for volunteering their time to do that.
Excellent. Are there any other questions or comments for the CEO on his report? Seeing none, we will go ahead and move on to, I believe I already asked this question, but let me make sure. Are there any emergent items? I saw that. All right, we're going to move on to number 9, closing items, action item recap. That's Mr. Carpenter and Ms. Holt.
So thank you. It was a very productive meeting. Officer elections successful. I do think there's an action item, Rich, in terms of coordinating about the mayor's invitation and how we want to do that. I'll perhaps reach out to you and governance committee to sort of wrangle how we want to do that. Budget was approved. Thank you very much. Title VI reports approved. Construction grant authorization approved. I think the only action item I had was following up on the mayor's invitation.
Wonderful. Deb, that was everything for you as well? Okay, then we'll go on to topics for next meeting. We'll talk about compensation and benefits, policy 2.3, construction policy 2.10, and we will be getting a recommendation from our CEO with regards to zero emission buses. That's going to be a very big meeting in October. 9.3, public comment. Deb, is there anyone online who'd like to speak with us?
Yes, Jim Mogensen, and Mr. Mogensen, you are unmuted.
Welcome.
All right. So I just wanted to say a couple things about Title VI, not just because I always do, but because I just wanted to make it clear. When I participated in the public input, I had anticipated being able to really take a deep dive into some of the technical issues, and life intervened. And so that didn't happen. But I do want to let you know that one of the things I had been talking about, and it relates to how Title VI operates in the real world, was addressed by Stephen Higgeside in his book, Better Buses, Better Cities, Chapter 5, starting on page 77. which talks about how the challenge of evaluating the transit service and how it's operating is difficult. Imagine coming up, we're going to have the increase in the millage services. And it'll be interesting to see when Mr. Carpenter gives the recommendation on the zero emission buses and some other things, how that's going to impact service and budgetary needs in terms of reconfiguring relating to finding the financing for that. So if that occurs, it will be mixed in with the millage service expansion. So when you do the expansion, everything is always okay. And to a certain degree, and this is my own personal sense, when the Title VI was finally done on the major route changes that were made during the pandemic, because it was done at such a high level, some of those impacts can get lost. They exist, but they get lost when you do it at the larger thing. Houston, when Houston reimagines its route system, that's what happened. It was a very small, it was, I think they had, imagine this, Houston redid their whole system, and I think their plan evaluation was 3 pages or 4 pages long, maybe. So that gives you an idea on how that can happen. This is a real issue, and I just ask the board to continue to look at that. You talked earlier in the board about how there was the boarding problems that was due to software on the TheRide, but to keep track of that and see when those kinds of things are happening, to make sure that that's what's going on and not other things. And finally, the issue about free money. This is happening. It relates to TheRide. So TheRide is now disconnected from the authority, sort of. With it still has the branding, but it is financed outside of that. And just to keep track of that also impacts evaluation of equity. There is no stop for TheRide in Ypsilanti. So thank you as always very much for your time and attention. And thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Deb, is there anyone else?
We have no more for public comment.
Thank you, everyone. That closes public comment, and we are on to adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Chris Allen, seconded by Mr. Simi Bar. All those in favor, raise your hands. Very good. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for all your hard work.